Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from around the world. My name is Preston Bucady, and we're logging on just a bit early today to sort of wait and host folks as they continue to join, hopping from other Zoom meetings, grabbing coffee, or hitting the restroom. Today, we'll be talking about the CMMC, the U.S. Department of Defense's new cybersecurity model, giving a refresh of an overview, recent developments that have occurred over the summer and into the fall. So just bear with us as we wait a couple more minutes here for folks. We'll start things off right after the top of the hour as people join us and continue to dial in. But feel free to just hang for the time being and get ready to talk about the CMMC. To the thing, all the creatures scream. Spill the tea and on the dead ass street. Find skeleton bone outside in the basement. And torture chambers down in the basement. Cobwebs hanging over your head. Used to be prayed by the grateful dead. And spending all the dirty came back to back. No other than my man won't back Jack. The MC, the night, back into the tunes of the preacher. From the black lagoon. There's a sign on the door that can't be missed. Please enter. But at your own risk, people remember it going in the haunted house, but never again see coming out. The act is true, I would want to leave. Here's an end, I hope I see it tonight. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening for those of you that have joined already. My name is Preston Bucady, and I'm a GRC consultant with IT Governance USA. Today, we're going to be talking about the cybersecurity maturity model. It's a new cybersecurity framework coming from the U.S. Department of Defense. And so the goal of today's conversation is to give you an overview of that model. Although, of course, if you've joined me on past webinars, you'll know I don't like to spend too much time going through old content because we've already discussed the CMMC a couple times now. I'd really like to focus our energy more on recent developments, what the accreditation board has been up to over the course of the summer and now into the fall, on into Halloween and spooky season. And we'll see what else they've got ready for us going into the winter and on into 2021. It's amazing that the year is almost already over, but the Department of Defense is ready. They've got new security control requirements for you. The question is whether you're ready for them. So again, thank you for those of you that have joined. Let's go ahead and get started today discussing the cybersecurity maturity model. So again, as a brief introduction, my name's Preston Bucady. I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado, where the snow is slightly thick and deep this morning. So hopefully you've got better weather wherever you may be joining us around the world. And I come to IT governance by way of a legal background. And I say that only to say that I've got a lot of experience here in policy implementation and the distillation of legal requirements into actionable business drivers for IT and operations and senior management. So the goal of today's course, or today's webinar, as it were, like I said, is not so much to spend too much time giving you an overview of the CMMC, but really to talk about where the rubber meets the road. How can we turn this into some actionable requirements? What does this mean for my organization? And ultimately, how can I use this to make money so that I can keep in business and I can take what has been an interesting, tumultuous year in 2020 and perhaps leverage opportunities in the cybersecurity space to gain a competitive advantage in 2021. Now, a brief word from our sponsor before I continue too much further. IT Governance is your one-stop shop for all governance, risk, and compliance issues. We've got a variety of products and services in this space aimed to help you get compliant in the way that you best see fit. So that ranges all the way from documentation and self-service types of toolkits, right? Gap analysis tools and policy templates, all the way up to full-blown consultancy and training where we can step in and advise your staff, educate them, build up competency, get you certifications you may need, and perhaps even push you towards a certified information security framework like ISO, ITIL, and others. And again, more generally, just to let you know, IT governance actually draws on experience from folks around the globe. So I just told you that I'm talking to you from snowy Denver, Colorado, but we've actually also got consultants and attorneys and other privacy cybersecurity professionals staffed around the globe in the EU, the UK, and other areas. This gives us a broad cultural appreciation of these issues, but it also provides an around the clock, around the globe level of coverage for these types of problems. Because as anybody on this call should well know by now, one of the issues with cybersecurity is the increasingly competitive international jurisdictional issues, right? We've seen this a little bit with the EU and the Schrems case. We've seen a little bit in the United States with TikTok. And so I just wanted to let you know that as a result of our structure and our team, we're able to comment on these issues from a truly global perspective and hopefully use that to inform and educate our clients. Now, why are we here today? It's not here to tell you about GRCI and IT governance. We're really here today because of data security. And if you have joined me on past calls, you will likely remember this slide. This was actually included in one of my original overviews of the CMMC. And the point of this slide, taking the language straight from our US government, is that frankly, the existing paradigm is not suitable for the issues we face today. There's a growing concern that contractors and subcontractors in the Department of Defense supply chain are simply either not aware or cannot adequately support their security obligations for managing sensitive government data, right? And like I just said, increasingly countries around the world are becoming attuned to this issue. They realize that data has value in terms of business value, intellectual property, even national security, right? And so to that end, the Department of Defense has grown increasingly concerned with the amount of problems and issues that they have experienced and witnessed within the Department of Defense supply chain in conducting their own audits. And so as a result, they are shifting the model. In the past, it was more of a self-assessment model to various NIST standards, right? And the problem is, frankly, that people can lie on self-assessments. They can make it up. They can go through and ascribe different levels of qualifications to themselves. Now, I'm getting a number of questions on the chat feature. So for those in the tech realm, can anybody just chime in and let me know in the chat? Are you able to hear me? It seems like some folks are not hearing my audio. Okay, cool. It sounds like some other folks can hear me, so hopefully that's not a widespread issue, but if folks are having issues, please just feel free to send in comments over the chat. I'll do our best to kind of adjust those as necessary. But with that, I'm going to continue on. And so, folks, today's discussion is really meant to be, like I said, partly a reminder, a bit of a refresher for us on what the CMMC is and what it requires, right? Who needs to comply and how is this thing different from all the other requirements we've already got to deal with, right? Well, from there, I'd like to give you a sense of what this will actually look like in practice. The Accreditation Board has given us more detail on just what it will mean to be CMMC certified and what that process will actually look like. So we're going to talk a little bit about audits and assessments and what future requirements may well be starting in January 2021. So the steps you can start to take now to prepare yourself. So to kick us off, let me give a brief refresher on an overview of the CMMC, right? What exactly is this CMMC model that I'm talking about? And more importantly, who needs to comply, right? Do I even need to be paying attention in this webinar, or can I go back to Minesweeper? Well, the short story is, if you plan to do business with the United States Department of Defense in some kind of capacity, you will probably need to be thinking about the CMMC. Certainly, these letters should be rattling around in your brain morning, noon, and night, because at some point, it's invariable, but that these security control requirements will appear in a contract to do business with the government. So we can see from the slide that actually the CMMC is about safeguarding certain types of government information, right? Federal contract information and controlled unclassified information. But it will be a business requirement for any company that wants to partner with the Department of Defense. So that will include prime contractors, and it will also include subcontractors. Some questions remain about how exactly those contract requirements will flow down. But ultimately, if you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, well, hey, we do business with the Department of Defense, we do business with the US government, or perhaps one of our partners does business with the government or the Department of Defense, you need to start preparing yourself for this issue, right? It will become a business requirement. And although the Department of Defense has indicated that this will be phased in over time, certainly over a number of years, perhaps on into 2025 or 2026, it will start to appear more and more and will increasingly become a mandatory compliance requirement. If you are not able to demonstrate your compliance with a certain required level of certification, frankly, you will not be allowed to bid on a contract. So that's who the CMMC applies to, right? More broadly, though, let's think about it. The CMMC is going to advise and guide you at a more general level on what the US government is going to expect in terms of cybersecurity, right? So we now know what the Department of Defense is going to mandate. This also gives us an indication on where cybersecurity practices are headed. Because in the history of cybersecurity frameworks and these paradigmatic approaches to controlling information as it's transferred across digital devices and increasingly over the internet, we have continuously seen a trend where the best and strongest cybersecurity controls come out of a military mindset. They eventually reach the government, and then they flow down across business and industry, where they ultimately become either a best practice or an industry requirement, right? That's actually how many of these cybersecurity standards were developed over time, like ISO 27001, right? These models are developed based on what starts as military requirements and what eventually evolve into government requirements and industry best practice. So again, I say, number one, if you're doing business with the Department of Defense, this will become a requirement. You cannot bury your head in the sand. You will be doing yourself a disservice by not at least starting to prepare for this issue. You'll see in a couple of slides why that's even more important based on the amount of time and money it may take. But the other thing I'll mention, right? So number one, you might have to do this if your business model depends on it. But number two, even if you don't do business with the Department of Defense, right? Even if this isn't a strict legal requirement, it may still be something you want to consider as a guide for the evolution and maturity of your cybersecurity program. Like I just said, increasingly we've seen it in the news more and more, and as we head towards an election here in the United States, cybersecurity issues, whether we're talking about Europe or China or Russia or Iran, cybersecurity issues are becoming increasingly important. And so even if this is not a strict contractual requirement for your business, it is advised that you look at these control strategies, you look at the actual practices outlined, and start to adapt your business to those strategies so that you can demonstrate that you are picking up on what I'm sure will eventually become industry best practice, right? So, hey, if you already know what to do, and we can already get an appreciation of how much effort it will take and how much money it's going to cost, why don't we just get the ball rolling, right? Get ahead of the curve on this issue, protect your business, protect your data, protect your supply chain, and also lay out a runway for future growth. So hopefully that's a nice appreciation of the CMMC. And the other thing I can tell you more into this section is that the CMMC is based on existing cybersecurity frameworks, right? So it actually picks up on controls from existing frameworks like ISO and NIST, and the government even got pretty creative and they stretched outside to pick up on cybersecurity practices from the aerospace industry, from critical secure infrastructure like nuclear programs and others. And so you can see they've got a tiered, graduated approach to cybersecurity. What they've told us is there are going to be levels to which you need to be certified, and depending on which level is required, that's ultimately going to tell you how many cybersecurity controls you need to have in place. You see here that level 1, the easiest one, is only 17 practices. Hopefully not too terribly difficult. Ideally, many of you companies that have joined the call today are already well on your way either through or past level 1, just because your IT department is already hitting the mark when it comes to basic cyber hygiene. Now, increasingly, it gets more difficult when companies have to mature. They can usually tick a box when it comes to security practices, but it's more complicated to actually manage those practices consistently and coherently, right? And so as we graduate up the scale from level 2 to level 5, you will see that not only are more controls added, right? You not only have to have a more layered defense strategy, but you also need to have a more mature management of that defense in depth, right? And that's why you can see these nomenclatures on the levels. We're going from the basics in level 1 all the way to good cyber hygiene at level 3, all the way to proactive or even advanced and progressive management of cyber hygiene at levels 4 and 5. Now, the key point on this slide that I do want to mention, the asterisks, is that this is the understanding of the CMMC model right now. And although it does appear that this will likely be the model that carries us into January 2021, I do want to mention that it is possible these things may continue to change over time. So keep that in mind. But let's press on, right? So we've got 5 levels, up to 171 controls. Those controls are broken down into 17 capability domains. And so you can see from that listing on the left-hand side of the slide, some common types of control families or domains that you no doubt recognize from other information security frameworks, right? We see things like asset management and access control. Ideally, those are already things your organization does. And if not, grab your phone and text the IT person right now. Go ahead and do it. Ask them, what are we doing when it comes to asset management or media protection or identification and authentication? Like I said, a lot of these capability domains, a lot of these controls and practices are pulled from existing cybersecurity standards. So to that end, recognize that you may already be doing some of this stuff, even if you don't know it, even if you're not aware of it. It may need to be managed and reviewed in more detail, but it could be that you've already able to check the box for level 1 or level 2. Early indications from the CMMC Accreditation Board have suggested that most organizations will be required to meet level 3 or below. Right, level 4 and 5, if I can go back just one slide, levels 4 and 5 with all those additional controls are really meant to be applicable to the companies that deal with super sensitive information, right? They have an articulated national security risk. That's not to say, though, that you can't adopt that same methodology. And so you see on the right-hand side of the slide, keep these things separated in your mind. On the one hand, we have a sheer listing of the number of practices from basic cyber hygiene all the way up to advanced, right? 17 controls all the way to 171. Well, the CMMC also mixes in an understanding of company maturity. And so that's where we get that breakdown on the left-hand side of the table, right? From level 1, we're simply performing the task, right? We're just checking the box. We're doing the stuff, right? If the capability domain says physical protection, well, at least we can be sure that we are physically protected. But if you ratchet up the maturity ladder, you will actually be doing these things a little bit more better, for lack of a good term, right? So it's not simply that you're performing the task, but it's actually documented. It's written down, it can be repeated because there's a standard policy or procedure that documents how that task is performed. Now at level 3, that's where the process would actually be managed, right? So it's not simply that we do it and we have it written down, but what's more is that we actually actively manage. It gets reviewed perhaps, or it at least gets audited sort of for a later after the fact understanding to determine, hey, is that process that we are performing, is that process that we've standardized and documented, is that actually suitable for what we needed to do, right? Do we need to do something different? And as you can see, right, so you go up this evolution from simply performing a task all the way to documenting and managing it to actually reviewing it and optimizing it over time. Hopefully some of you on the call are thinking ISO, continual improvement, right? ISO, continual improvement. Again, hey, This was not invented entirely from scratch. They leveraged a lot of learnings that are already out there. And that's why we see this breakdown, not just in terms of the level you need to meet by virtue of the number of controls that must be implemented, right? How good is your security from level 1 to 5, but also how mature is the management of that security? Because as we have seen time and time again with all the horror stories out there, the Targets, the Equifaxes, the Sonys, and the Yahoos, simply having good security is not enough. You actually have to manage and use it, right? And so that's why the CMMC has combined this model to say, hey, we want a tiered, graduated approach to the level of controls implementation, but we also want this tiered, graduated approach so that we can understand the level of maturity with which the organization has actually implemented those controls. So if you think about it, in theory, someone could have implemented a large number of controls, right? They might be at a high level in terms of their security posture, but they might be at a low level in terms of their evolution or maturity. So ideally, as you are ratcheting up the levels, whatever level you may need to meet based on your business requirements, try to take that path in parallel, right? Try to increase your information security posture by implementing controls at the same time that you evolve your maturity in managing those controls. And so you can see from this slide, we've got a nice breakdown of where those controls come from, where they've been pulled into, and where else extraneous or additional controls have been yanked or grabbed from. Now, the one thing I'll call out here under level 4, and I think under level 5 as well, I believe, if I am correct in saying so, I believe draft NIST publication 800-171B has actually been formally republished as 800-172. So, minor bit of clarification for the nerds like me on the call, but it is important to understand that, hey, NIST is still evolving and being formulated and drafted at the same time that it's being combined in the CMMC model. So it's very, very critically important for you as a business to understand what are my legal requirements here, right? Because you certainly don't want to just start applying controls willy-nilly. That might be a colossal waste of time and energy without a requisite return on investment in terms of security, right? You actually want to do stuff that's going to benefit your organization and drive value to your business. So to that end, it's very, very important to understand what level do you have to meet, if any, in terms of the controls implementation and the maturity model. So let's start to talk then about audit and assessment, right? So we've got an understanding of, generally speaking, here's what the CMMC requires, right? At the end of the day, if I had to boil it down to an elevator pitch, you're gonna have to get a certificate. That ain't rocket science. But the question is, how do we actually do this, right? Again, where does the rubber meet the road? So again, you know, if you were on one of my previous CMMC webinars, you'll no doubt remember this slide, right? This was our early appreciation of the situation. The idea was that there would be an accreditation model, right? And the accreditation board, you see there, was constructed with the DoD and industry members. They're responsible for coming up with the certification process, the training process, the accreditation process, the whole 9 yards. Over time, they've given us more information, right? We certainly have more detail than this slide would imply. And the first thing I want everyone on this call to understand is this. Now, I'm not making this up. If you don't believe me, Google CMMC AB. Go to the website. Go to the page that says organizations seeking certification, and you will see this graphic blasted on the top of the page. To me, that indicates that the CMMC Accreditation Board is already thinking that this process will be somewhat long and somewhat complex. Obviously, that depends on you, your resourcing, and your capability to drive at this project. But if we understand that today, in October of 2020, they're already telling us that we need to plan for a 6-month roadmap to be CMMC certified, I think we can safely say that that's a pretty accurate assessment. That's probably a fair assessment that the government is giving to us so that we'll start to get our ducks in a row ahead of time. And frankly, it might even be a little bit short because the government might be trying to hopefully scare people into getting ready, right? So again, that's the first thing to think about. If you are required to be CMM certified, if you know in the back of your mind right now We do business with the Department of Defense. We've already had to deal with NIST or FedRAMP or FSMA. I think CMMC will be on our plate soon. Keep in mind that you need to start planning the actual act of certification at least 6 months in advance. And that doesn't necessarily count all the run-up activity to be ready for the certification effort itself, right? All that effort just to get ready for that date. So let's actually talk through the process that they've outlined for us, right? The CMMC accreditation body, again, I'm not pointing fingers, but I'm saying I take this directly from them. So if you don't believe me, go ask them yourselves. They think that this is going to be a somewhat convoluted process. Step one is understanding the CMMC requirements, like I said, right? And we can already hopefully appreciate a sense of what this thing will require. Like I said, at its most basic, you're gonna have to get a certificate. And ideally, if it goes the way it's supposed to, the government will come to you and say, here's what kind of certificate you need to get. Now, as any American on the phone will know, oftentimes our government is not that easy to work with, right? Certainly if you've been to the DMV, you know what I'm talking about. And so what's more important, I think, is not just really generally understanding your CMMC requirements and what this model represents. I think what's really more important is for you to sit down and analyze your business and say, what is the scope of my certification going to be? Because the accreditation board has indicated that you can be CMMC certified either wholly across the enterprise, right? The entire organization is CMMC certified, or perhaps just one program or one organizational unit. So to that end, it's a bit of an existential question for you, the client that wants to be CMMC certified. I certainly guide folks through this question all the time when it comes to ISO projects, because there are pros and cons to each approach. On the one hand, if you want to get your entire company certified, it can be an advantageous approach, because if you think about it, you're gearing up, right? You're getting all this resourcing and energy to get understanding on where we are and what we need to do. If all of the troops are going to be standing at attention, you might as well get them to all fall in line, right? Now, on the flip side, if you're going to get the entire organization certified, think about it, you're going to get the entire organization certified. That can include extraneous business management functions that don't necessarily have an impact that relates to the CMMC, right? For example, human resources or maybe marketing. So consider that if you want to get the entire enterprise CMMC certified, it's probably going to take you more time and more money, because frankly, you're getting more work done, right? As opposed to just one department or just one business unit, or even just potentially one product area. You're doing it for everyone everywhere. Now, like I said, on the flip side, there are pros and cons. The benefit of spending that time and energy is that you will have a belt to braces approach across the company, right? Everyone will understand CMMC. Everyone will walk the walk and talk the talk, as opposed to trying to manage an information security program in one hand and a CMMC information security program in another, right? That starts to get confusing over time. Where do the lines of scope blur? Where do they cross? So sometimes it is simpler to get the entire organization certified, even though it might represent more work. Sometimes that work is worth it, because then you have the value of having that certificate apply across the organization, as opposed to just one product line that may need to be repeated or replicated if you develop a new product or a new program or new department that falls subject to the CMMC requirements. So again, all of that to say, step one is understanding just what you need to do, generally speaking, right? Figure out what the CMMC requires, and for those of you on the call, you're already ahead of the game there. Step two is to start to think about specifically what will be the scope of your certificate. What exactly touches that information we saw a couple slides ago, right? The controlled and classified information, or that federal contract information. Which parts of your business area actually are legally required to be CMMC certified? Which ones do you want to be CMMC certified? There is a difference, and that difference is key. From there, you can identify the desired maturity level. And again, like I said, if everything goes the way it's supposed to, the government should come to you with that level in mind. They're going to say, hey, we need someone who's a level 3, and they're going to pick people who are level 3. It's as simple as that, right? You'll either be level 3 certified or you won't. And if you are not, you will not appear in the bid list. You won't appear in the database for approved subcontractors. Your name simply will not enter the conversation. So one of the things perhaps for you to do, again, an existential question for the organization, is identify the maturity level that you would actually desire to have, right? Which is the level you're going to need to win bids, keep business, attract new business, right? The government is going to know what it requires from you at the most bare bones level, but what else are you going to want or need in order to keep the money coming in and keep the lights on? So consider, right, there's going to be a certain requirement as it relates to the CMMC, what the government is telling you you must do, but you'll also need to consider what do you want to do? Because like I just said, there's no point in going through this effort multiple times. So if you're going to sit down and devote all the attention and energy to a CMMC compliance project, make sure you're hitting the mark where you want to hit it. Define your objectives based on what is needed and what is desired, and then you can start to work towards those objectives, right? Now, how do we work towards those objectives? Well, we see here that sort of turquoise or teal box. It's about pre-assessment. The idea is, hey, figure out where you are today and do a bit of a gap assessment, right? Figure out where you are, where are you supposed to be, or where do you want to be? And then identify those gaps and go around closing them. Simple in theory, more complicated in practice, right? As we all know from anyone who's ever done a compliance gap analysis, oftentimes closing those gaps can be tricky, especially when they start to spread across the organization, right? Again, consider the scope of your program. If your gaps relate to business areas or departments that are technically outside of scope, does that change your understanding? Does that drag them into scope? Or can you cleanly and neatly deal with those interfaces and interdependencies between the two groups? Now, one thing I want to point out here, there's a lot of acronyms on this slide, and in classic form, the US government has given us a bit of an alphabet soup with the CMMC, so I want to be clear about what we're talking about here. When I say RPO on the bottom of that middle grouping, RPO is basically a registered practitioner or provider. It's essentially a consultancy service that can guide you through the gap analysis and assessment. Compare that in contrast with a C3PAO, right? Somebody was clearly a fan of Star Wars in that naming meeting. But a C3PAO is a certified third-party assessment organization. So the key difference is understand what are you trying to do, right? The bottom of the middle section actually correlates quite nicely with the top, because there is a difference between doing an analysis, a gap assessment, if you will, right? Just trying to figure out what do we need to do versus the actual certified formal, nuts and bolts. This is the big deal. This is the show certified assessment, right? So again, what I'm trying to demonstrate is that when you are working through this stage of the process, when you are just trying to figure out what exactly are we supposed to do and how much do we need to do and what's it going to cost and how long is it going to take to accomplish, consider that you can work with a variety of consultancy firms, either externally or internally, right? You can leverage knowledge and competency and experience to identify your desired level, to identify the gaps, and to work towards closing or remediating those gaps. The critical difference is that when you actually want to go get your CMMC certificate, right, the formal big deal, that must be conducted with a certified assessor, right? And that's part of the reason we are here today. Like I said, this whole self-assessment, self-attestation model clearly has never worked. Certainly, if any of you have a background in law enforcement, you'll agree with me, right? Have you ever pulled someone over and said, do you know why I pulled you over today? And they were perfectly honest with you. Oh, yes, I was speeding and my blinker wasn't on. And you know what? Actually, my driver's license is out of date. They don't do that, right? So that's why we don't do the self-assessment model anymore. At some point, you will have to reach out to a C3PAO, a certified third-party assessment organization, and you will have to have a certified assessor come in to conduct the CMMC assessment. From there, you can see that it's going to automatically kind of bake in about 90 days, 3 months to resolve any findings. Hopefully, again, if you guys are familiar with ISO out there in the netherworlds, You'll be familiar with this kind of model, right? We'll basically come in and do an audit of your system to see if you're meeting the requirements. If so, great. But presumably there will be some issues. They might be major, they might be minor, but there might be some issues. And when we identify those issues, we're going to give you a chance to resolve them, right? So you have 3 months to circle back after that assessment and basically put a cap on it, right? Identify any findings, put them on a corrective action plan, and push them through to resolution. Send evidence of that resolution back to your certified assessor so that that person can be sure that you have sort of fully completed the project, right? You are CMMC certified by virtue of being assessed. And basically all that happens from there is paperwork, right? The certified assessor will submit their audit findings and report over to the accreditation board, and then the accreditation board will review it. They'll do their thing. Upon approval, a 3-year certificate will be issued, and presumably there will be an ongoing set of surveillance audits or site visits to make sure you are maintaining this certificate, right? You are holding up your representations. You are clearly sticking to the same scope. It hasn't expanded potentially by adding new things that aren't covered, right? So over time, over this 3-year period, they'll probably come back and assess you. At a certain point, they're going to come back and do another big assessment, right, with a certified assessor, and they'll give you another 3-year certificate. But ideally, if you do this all correctly and you spend that time and money and you do it right, you don't just do it, but you do it right, this should not represent a major issue, right? The idea is not unlike any corporate project anywhere. We want to figure out what we want or need. Where are we today in relation to that? What is it going to take to close those gaps? Let's put a project plan in place with KPIs and deliverables. Once we've met those objectives and provided those deliverables, we'll go get the formal assessment. By that time, ideally, we've gone through things so deeply with such a fine-tooth comb that the auditor can't find any problems, and they won't. So they'll give us a glowing recommendation and we'll get our certificate, we'll keep it, and we'll never have any problems, right? That's the ideal world. And so again, I circle back to this idea that you've got to budget some time here, right? Give yourself a runway. The CMMC certificate is valid for 3 years, but as you just saw, the actual certification process itself is going to take 6 months, right? 3 of those months, 90 days, is simply just built in for you to resolve findings. So again, consider that the actual act of certification assessment is probably potentially going to take 6 months or more, depending on the size of your business, depending on the scope of your CMMC program, depending on your geographic range, what you're providing to the government, et cetera, right? But the idea is there also might be things before that even takes place, right? Because presumably you've got some gaps. First thing you're going to have to do is figure out what those gaps are, where are they, and what it's going to take to fix them. Only then can you start the timer on this 6-month certification process. And once you go through all of that, you jump through all of the hoops, you pay the bills on time, everything goes according to plan, you'll get your CMMC certificate, and now you will be allowed to bid on DoD contracts up to the identified maturity level. Like I said, you'll actually have your information as part of the database, so you will be authorized to reply to RFIs and RFPs. If you are not CMM certified, frankly, like I said earlier, your name is just not going to appear on the list. This will be a requirement that phases in over a number of years. I've alternatively heard either 2025 or 2026. Either way, the government's already started to put this in place now. It actually started this summer. So it started, it's already going on, it's going to increase. This is the world we are going to live in. It's time to deal with it. But that's not to say that it's going to be a problem. Ideally, this is a good thing. And if you spend the time and energy appropriately, this will hopefully bolster your defenses in terms of information security, and it will increase your business profitability because it will allow you to either, number one, bid on Department of Defense contracts, or just more generally demonstrate to private industry that you're meeting military grade specifications, right? You are doing the absolute most you can do. You're meeting government mandates on cybersecurity, even if your business partners don't ask for it or require it, right? So why not go above and beyond? Keep the lights running, I think, is the ultimate takeaway here. Because like I said, whether this will be a legal requirement now or in the future, this stuff is coming for you. And for those of you that don't believe me, think about other legal issues in the history of our society. Car safety, food safety are two good examples. At first, when those technologies appeared, they created all sorts of societal benefits. They also created societal harms. Over time, society understood what those harms were. They made laws protecting consumers from those harms, and they started taxing businesses to compensate consumers for the harm they're creating, right? When it comes to pollution or auto accidents or whatever it may be. Information security is headed that way. We've seen it over the course of years now, right? Cambridge Analytica with Facebook, Edward Snowden really kicked us off years ago. The EU's GDPR brought us to where we are today, and now even the Department of Defense is saying we need a more formal, structured model. We're going to start mandating accredited certification, and I can guarantee, I'd be willing to bet anyone on this call here, a cup of coffee or a beer, these requirements will start to flow down into private industry, and in the next 10 years or less, you'll start to see these same requirements come to you either as a matter of bidding and best practice, right? You'll simply need to demonstrate it in order to do business, or it'll be a contractual requirement one way or the other. So how do we start to prepare for this future world that we're headed into, right? I don't mean to be so myopic and dystopic. It's actually a good thing that people across the world care more about information security, and they're starting to hold everyone to a higher standard. So there's a little bit of maturity that I think we all need to go through. What are the steps we can start taking today to deal with these issues? Well, again, I grabbed a graphic from the CMMC Accreditation Board because there is no better group that can say it than themselves. Here is the timeline for where things have been going and where they are headed. So hopefully this gives you a 50,000-foot overview into what's next in terms of CMMC compliance, right? And so if you think about it, we are probably somewhere between levels 4 and 5. I'll actually even give some credit to the accreditation board. I'd actually put them somewhere between levels 5 and 6, because it's my understanding that they have already partnered with some licensed publishers to start to put out training content for the first round of provisional assessors, right? So they're almost already beta testing a group of 72 assessors working through their training material, their certification exams, their background and security clearances. And so they're working to release the first wave of accredited certified assessors. Over time, more materials will be released as that feedback loop builds upon itself to improve the training, the certification, the background checks, et cetera, right? So you can see this was ultimately formed in January of 2020. It's been developed and enhanced over the course of the year. Crazy year with COVID and everything else, so I think some progress was lost a little bit, but not too much, because the ecosystem is ultimately designed and built. The accreditation board has already started to receive applications for certified third-party assessment organizations. So presumably at some point during this winter, we'll start to see a list of those organizations that have been passed through the ringer, right? Those organizations that are officially and formally authorized to provide certified CMMC assessments. We'll start to receive that list, presumably in time with that first graduating class of CMMC assessors, right? So ideally, presumably by the end of winter, early spring 2021, we'll already have in place the ecosystem to go live, right? And people can start to actually apply for certifications, receive their assessment, actually receive their certificate. How cool is that, right? You can frame it and keep it at your mom's house. And then over time, like I said earlier, more and more of these requirements will start to appear in the actual contracts for DoD business. So a lot of stuff has been accomplished, a lot more to still take place. Where does this leave you, right? Because many of you are presumably thinking, I've got some time, right? Well, like I said on the previous slide, hopefully it's not as much time as you are thinking. Give yourself a bit of a runway, because the certification process itself is going to take some time. But also consider that, hey, a lot of this is still a little bit up in the air. It's falling closer and closer to the ground, right? The accreditation board is circling the drain, starting to crystallize their requirements. But you saw even on my presentation that stuff is still subject to change, right? We've still got 2 months left in 2020. And so the first thing that I can advise you to do today is pick an already existing industry recognized framework to guide your cyber risk and data governance approach. Sounds like a lot of jargon, but what I really mean there is this. Somebody at your organization is in charge of information security, right? Whether they know it or not, somebody is responsible, right? It might be the IT person. It might be the accountant who likes to play with computers on Sundays. I don't really care. I'm telling you, somebody at your organization is accountable for these issues. You need to understand how they're actually managing those issues, right? Because taking a point-by-point, ad hoc, check the box type of approach is going to ultimately leave you with a gigantic laundry list of incomprehensible information security requirements. You're basically going to be left with spreadsheets coming from business partners and government contracts that have different control frameworks that are trying to make you do different stuff. Ultimately, what I'm saying is you need somebody to synthesize those things. You need somebody to translate all these different control frameworks into a standard at the organization that is defined by procedural operation. So what I mean there is you've got standardized approaches to information security that are managed and reviewed by someone at a senior management level. And that approach is actually aligned to some sort of industry practice, right? Whether it's NIST or COBIT or ITIL or ISO, doesn't necessarily matter. I personally have opinions, and in this case, I would go with ISO and NIST because they are most heavily relied on as the backbone of the CMMC. But ultimately, my first suggestion is you need to align yourself to a framework, right? Start to understand what are you doing and how does that compare to the outside world. From there, you can do a bit of that gap analysis activity to try to understand where are you today, right? Because you've sort of aligned yourself to industry best practice, done a bit of benchmarking. Okay, well now figure out where you want to or need to be. Think about your CMMC desired level. Think about your business requirements. From there, perform a gap analysis, right? Actually do that gap analysis activity to determine whether additional controls are needed. And so as you see on this slide, a lot of stuff is sort of already geared to existing controls frameworks like ISO and NIST, but I will give you a sneak preview for the folks that have joined us today. IT governance is actually working on a CMMC gap analysis tool. So like I said at the beginning of the slide, right, we pride ourselves on offering a variety of service offerings to our customers. So that gap analysis tool may ultimately come to market as a self-service tool. It may come along with certified consultancy as appropriate. Long story short, ultimately how it comes out doesn't necessarily matter. You need to think about what your gaps are and what you may need to do to close those gaps. You can start that gap analysis activity now, right? We already know what the CMMC model looks like. We already know the paradigms that it's built upon. We can already start to give you a sense of where your gaps are and what you might need to do to close those and bring yourself closer to that assessment or audit schedule. And when you get to that point, you feel comfortable, you feel confident that you've closed all the gaps, right? You've plugged all the holes. Your information security is the best it could possibly be. Only then do I recommend actually scheduling the audit to demonstrate compliance with CMMC. And as you saw in that last slide, technically, at least as of October 27th, you can't even really get that done yet. We got to wait for this graduated class of CMMC assessors. We've got to wait for the graduating class of C3PAOs. So presumably there are people, there are organizations that are already ahead of you in the queue, right? There are organizations that were having this discussion last year at this time. They've already thought about their framework. They've already identified their gaps and closed them. They're just sitting and waiting for their assessor to be assigned to them, right? Think about that. They might have spent already 12 months. If you are just now thinking of this process, you are where those companies were a year ago, right? So start the ball rolling. Don't let this sit until 2021, because inevitably there will be new problems and new issues. If you've already got the budget aligned and there's already a bit of breathing room by virtue of upcoming holidays, start to get your ducks in a row, right? Perform that gap analysis to determine whether you need any additional controls and start to figure out how well aligned are you to the ISO framework. Do you have And honestly think to yourself in your own mind right now as I say it, do you have a good understanding of your cybersecurity grade card, right? Are you doing A+, B-, or are you just skating by with a C or a D? If you can't pick a letter grade right now in your head, then you don't have a good enough understanding of your information security program, and you need to go back and build that to more cleanly and efficiently manage it over time. That will make the CMMC process much, much easier, I can guarantee it. Now, in terms of other resources and support, obviously we've got no shortage of things. For those of you that have joined me on past webinars, you'll know I'm more than happy to bore you to death about these topics. I love talking about them. I'm often calling friends and family on the weekend just to keep them up at night, or I should say maybe to put them to sleep, as I talk about CMMC and other data privacy and cybersecurity issues. So there's all kinds of ways that you can reach out to us for more information and guidance on this topic. Give us a call, especially nowadays. I'd love to speak to an actual human. I've had enough of the emails and Zoom meetings for one lifetime, but that's not to say we're also not open to other communication channels as well. And of course, if you've got questions right now on the webinar, as we approach the top of the hour, feel free to dump them in, right? Shoot them over to our email address, put them in the chat feature of the GoToWebinar tool, and I'll do my best to reply to them as best I can. As always, if we get a ton of questions, we're happy to go over and even send out written answers along with copies of the slide content so that you can share this with other people or review it at your leisure as necessary, right? So like I said, we've got all kinds of resources and support. And I think the first step, if I can be transparent with the folks on the call today, is just to educate yourself. Really, don't go around and start buying anything just quite yet. I think, like I've tried to illustrate, is first you need to figure out what you want and what you need. So give us a buzz, reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to guide you through that thought process and point you to any of our informational resources on just how to kick this project off and get it started. Because there's a lot of stuff that you may want to or need to do on your own, but our goal here at IT Governance is to help you, right? It's to teach you how to fish so that you can go on and fish on your own. So if you're sitting there with a fishing pole in hand, or even if you don't have a fishing pole, but you're looking at the lake and wondering where the fish are, give us a buzz. We can start to help you think through this issue and align your understanding to industry best practice based on our experience and based on what we see in your peers in the industry. We can talk about CMMC gaps. We can start to close those, and we can put you on a roadmap to certified assessment so that you can hit the ground running in January 2021. You'll already have this issue resolved, and you can focus on whatever else next year may decide to throw at us. So with that, again, my name is Preston Bucati. That is the end of my scheduled content, but I'm always happy to answer any questions as they may come in. I appreciate those of you that have joined thus far. And as always, please, please, please let us know how these webinars are. I love the feedback, always looking to improve and make these more useful to you, the audience. So now's your time to ask any and all questions that have been bugging you. I'll sit here and sort of read through them as they come in, but in the absence of that, I just do want to say thank you for joining, and I hope that you're able to join us on future webinars as we continue to roll out CMMC offerings and work towards becoming a certified assessor that can put you on a pathway from figuring out where you are today, perhaps a state of relative immaturity, all the way to getting you CMMC certified. So I did have one question come in here, and the question was, when will I see CMMC requirements in my contracts? That's a great question, and frankly, I don't really know the answer. I think that will just depend on the contract and whether you're the lucky duck of the day. So certainly keep your eyes peeled. If you've got active contracts or bids with the US Department of Defense, maybe go ahead and reach out to your contacts and start to get them thinking about this. See what their thoughts are. Are they going to put you on a track of any kind? That may help you better understand your timeline and when you need to meet these requirements. So like I said, for that question, maybe go reach out to your contacts at the Department of Defense or with your businesses and partners and see what their thoughts are, because that might give you a better appreciation of when everybody is supposed to be in the room with the right paperwork. And you'll certainly want to know where to be and what to bring, right? I see another question coming in here. will we be sharing the slides with the participants? Yes, of course, happy to do that. And I will do my best to post those to LinkedIn as well. I've been trying to be more active on there, despite the fact that I am a privacy guru at heart. I've got to get more onto the social media to get that information out to you guys. So I'll do my best to share it either directly over email or we'll post it on our LinkedIn page as well, but we'll certainly make the materials available to you. Also, don't forget, as much as you have no doubt sensed it, I love talking about this stuff, so you can always give me a buzz and I'll bother you with any kinds of details around CMMC specifically, or data privacy and cybersecurity more generally. So I'm happy to share these slides directly with you, either for your own resources or to turn around and share them internally and evangelize. Absolutely happy to do it. That's kind of my point. And for those that have been watching, in all of these slides, you've no doubt noticed various hyperlinks, various images. I've tried to link back to the source so that you can use this as a knowledge resource as well, right? So that's awesome. Great question. Thank you for asking. Let's see if I can see any others. It looks like my audio did resolve, so ideally that's good. If folks couldn't hear me, I do ask that you please shoot me a note just so I can take appropriate steps with IT or other parties to resolve any technical issues. We always want to make sure that these things run smoothly for you guys. So if you had any technical difficulties during the call, feel free to just give me a short note. Just helps me to improve for next time. But other than that, folks, I don't see any other questions coming in. So I'm happy to hang around and wait for a couple more minutes, just in case you're like me and you're a slow burner. Maybe one pops into your head. But if not, feel free to leave. And I say again, thank you for joining. We're going to be continuing to release more resources on the CMMC so that we can educate and inform and obviously, hopefully guide you and advise you. So stay tuned. I will be releasing more CMMC webinar content, trying to do much more on a regular recurring basis. And especially as we head into the holidays with the election next week, yowza, there's plenty of stuff to talk about. So we'll be having more webinars, don't doubt that. And we'll also be releasing more blog posts and other free information resources as always. And like I said, always a good place to start there. Check out what blogs have been posted, because we do our best to give you a lot of knowledge and information up front so that you've got the tools and information available to make decisions based on what you think and what you need. With that, my name is Preston Mukady. Again, thank you all for joining. I hope you have the good rest of the Tuesday and enjoy the rest of this week leading up to Halloween. Stay safe, wash your hands, and other than that, we hope to see you again on a future webinar from IT Governance. This is Preston Mukady signing off. Thank you again.